Now the microphone's on. Good to see you here tonight. Glad you could be here. Hope you had a really good day. I just saw Rodney, and I know he'd been in Queen City this weekend, and he said, man, I had the best day, which is great. It is the Lord's Day. And anytime you can spend that with other Christians, whether they are here or in another state, what a blessing. I can't imagine what Danny and Charles are getting to go through, spending time with Christians down in Guyana. I'm looking very forward, Lord willing, that and the COVID don't rise, that I'll be able to go to the Caribbean next week and travel to be with the Christians down there. They're very excited. I do want to say thank you. Several of you have been able to contribute to some of the needs to rent the tent and the chairs and things, and it's very, very generous. I mean, really generous, and that is deeply appreciated. We are blessed people, very blessed people. Tonight we want to talk about being connected. We have been spending the last few months discussing the ways that we deal with the internal matters of the church, the way that we look out for one another, the way that we value one another as Christians, and what we can do for one another is so important. We are never meant to be isolated in our Christianity. And when we talk about church, as we said this morning, it is not a passive experience. It's not a proxy experience where you wait for someone to do it for you. Church, the Lord's church, to be Christians means we are involved with one another. And that means we are connected to one another. Now that can be a challenge. That can be a real challenge because you may sit there and say to yourself, I need some space. I get that. You may sit there and say, but I am an introvert. I get that. And some of you say, I'm down. I'm an extrovert. I'll meet all of you. And if you're not ready for it, I'll give you a hug anyway. Some of you are that. And that's good. It really is. But the way that we connect with one another is important. We live in a world that has a tremendous challenge at the moment, always has, but it seems especially poignant now, the challenge to connect. I mean, we can be appearing as if we are very vibrant and connecting and tied to one another, but not really know each other at all, not with any depth. You can ask your neighbor sitting next to you, what do you do? They may tell you and say, that's so nice. I appreciate that. And then go about your business. You haven't learned anything, not anything of any real substance. There's no real connection. You have a fact, you have a bit of information, but you really didn't get into any depth in that. Or we can say, how are you doing? I'm doing great. Thank you very much. And what we get in that connection is a sense of politeness that we acknowledge our culture of looking out for one another and asking how are you doing. That's very polite. It is a sense that I acknowledge you. I acknowledge you. We are pleasant. We move on. It is a kind of connectedness, but it doesn't really have any depth. Not really. And in Christianity, there's got to be a sense of depth. We know that. When we picture or read the stories in the gospel of Jesus going around with the apostles, his disciples, those guys got 3 years walking with Jesus. There was depth in what they experienced or what they went through. There was moments and times that they were challenged together and they experienced those obstacles together. There was triumphs that they had and they got to do that together with Jesus. They were very, very connected through those moments. Conversations that they had with one another and with Jesus. And they were amazing. They were amazing. In Mark chapter 9, there's one of them, and you can turn over to Mark if you want, because we're going to spend quite a bit of time there today, a little bit in Luke, but mostly in Mark. And Jesus is going to ask them some questions. And he is really challenging them in their thinking. And actually, let's go over to chapter 8 first. We'll go to chapter 8. And Jesus is going to sit there with them, and he's going to ask them this critical question. And there are certain degrees of learning and understanding that they have because of the time with Jesus. They're not all the way there yet, but they're getting there. But he asks them at this critical moment. Jesus and his disciples went out to the towns of Caesarea Philippi. And on the road, he asked his disciples, saying to them, who do men say that I am? It's an interesting question. When you look out and you hear the people talking, and you're with them, and they're communicating to you, who do they think that I am? Who do they see in me? How do they know me and understand me? And, well, they answered, John the Baptist. But some say Elijah. Another say one of the prophets. Those are all incorrect answers. They didn't really know Jesus. Some people were trying to figure him out. Some people were trying to approach it and make sense based on points of reference to Old Testament characters, but they weren't prepared to let him be the Messiah in their heads and in their hearts. They're searching for it, and hopefully some of them found it, but they're asking at this point, he asked them, "Who do you say that I am? Do you know me? Do you understand me?" Because he knows them, and he's been spending time with them, and they are connected in a very particular way, so direct. But where are they in their understanding of who Jesus is? And Peter says to him, "You are the Christ," probably pretty confidently. Then he strictly warned them that they should tell no one about him. In the next chapter, in Mark chapter 9, there's a little greater degree of depth in their understanding of who he is on the Mount of Transfiguration. And they're elevating their understanding of who he is because they see him presented in the great glory of God. What a privilege to be able to see that. And even in their confusion, Peter wanting to build a tabernacle for the three that they saw, Moses and Elijah and Jesus, there was a greater level of understanding that was given because God said, this is my beloved Son. This is him. Hear ye him. Meaning, give him the priority, give him the prominence. And to hear that from the voice of God, deeper level of understanding, a deeper level of connectedness, a shift in the degree of that relationship, in the depths of it. I think about those things in the way that they are challenged in that moment, and it's important for us to think about it. Jesus also challenged them with some really incredible teachings. Luke, I said we'd be at Luke, and here we are in chapter 9, and he gives them this moment because if you understand him, this will make more sense. If you are connected to Jesus, this will make a greater degree of sense. If you've experienced life as a Christian as demonstrated by Jesus, this verse is incredibly powerful. And you have a sense of it. And if you go through it together with other Christians, it's got some force to it as well. If anyone would come after me, Jesus says, let him deny himself. Okay? Take up his cross daily and follow me. Let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. He's explaining to them that if you really are going to follow Jesus, it is an everyday, all-encompassing thing that you should do. Because it's not about you. You should deny yourselves. And anything that holds you back from following him, let it go. Deny that. Because it's so valuable that you understand that Jesus is here to transform you into something you can never be without him. And he's going to lead you on a path that draws you closer to God. And he's asking them to do that, teaching them how to do that with the experiences that they share. More on those in just a moment. But it's a challenge he's given to them to follow after him. And it's going to be difficult sometimes, but so worthwhile. And if you've been a Christian for some time and you, in your dedication to Jesus, have experienced any level of those obstacles and the triumphs that go along with it, you get to this verse in a very different way than someone who has never experienced any of those and maybe just kind of reads in Christianity as a bit theoretical. Yeah, you love some people, you be kind and nice to each other. It's a different experience. Why? Because you know Jesus in a different way. Not just the words on the page, but the words in your heart and in your mind and in your life. Sometimes you have to deny yourself. Take up your cross daily and follow him. Of course, that's one level of their understanding. And we know if this is in Luke 9, it's pretty early. He's not yet been crucified. I sometimes wonder if they look back at the saying of Jesus and when he said, take up the cross daily, what that meant to them at this point and what it meant to them after he was crucified must have been wildly different things. Wildly different. Even though he told them, I'm going to die. I'm going to die and I'm going to be resurrected. That's going to happen. They think of it in a sense, that's the words of Jesus. We value those. But to see that and to experience that and to know where they did not deny themselves in the midst of that, And they didn't follow him in the midst of that. And they had this failure in the moment of it, but you learn a lot from failures. If you're smart, you learn a lot from your failures. This is a great podcast I've been listening to. It was talking about failing and what you learn from failing. And there was an interview that was given to Tony Hawk, of all people, the most well-known skateboarder of all time, accomplished a million things. If you don't even know what skateboarding really is, you've probably heard the name Tony Hawk. The thing about him is he failed a lot. Even in his 50s, he's still on these ramps going 10 feet in the air, and you're like, please stop, you're in your 50s. And it cost him. He broke his femur a couple years ago. Broke your femur in your 50s? It healed up. Guess what? He's back on it again. It's just who he is. But the main thing he talked about through all those injuries, it was all data points to him. Oh, I did this data point. I failed, because it happens a lot in that particular sport. You're going to get cut. You're going to get beat up. You're going to get bruised. You're going to get banged up. You are essentially flinging yourself to the earth constantly. But when you get it, it's the best thing in the world. But that failure is simply a data point, a bit of information on what do I adjust to get it better next time? What do I change to get it better? Do I move my foot slightly forward? Do I lean back? Do I need more speed? It changes your thinking and how you approach. It's the same principle that I'm sure they had when it comes to these kinds of failures, because we know they stuck with Jesus. But when they abandoned him at the cross, when Peter denied him his 3 times, when they went on their way, they did not deny themselves. They denied Jesus. They didn't take up their cross in following him. They turned and ran. And they didn't follow him. They followed after their own fears, their own concerns, their own worries of what the religious leaders were going to do to them. It was a failure moment. But it was also a learning moment. And if they would grab and twist and follow after Jesus in that, it could be even better and be even more connected to him and connected to one another and grow from that. The connectedness didn't have to stop. It becomes pretty complex what they're going through. We find that being connected to one another in that sense is so much more than simply saying, hey man, how you doing? I'm great. Good to see you today, and moving on. They were experiencing the fullness of life as a Christian. And when we read that and hear that, that's not for us to go, man, good for them. It's for us to say, okay, that was written by God on paper for me to see as an example and to pursue it in the same way. Pursue it in the absolute same way so that I can be more connected to Jesus, more connected to his church, more connected to one another, and put the effort in, because it's not passive and you can't do it by proxy. It requires engaging. And even though it gets scary sometimes, we must do it. We must do it. Even in the secular world, this is really, really well understood. I'm going to give you an example. This guy. I don't know how you feel about Robin Williams. Most people feel pretty good about him. And your connection to him is probably tied to a TV show he did, Mork and Mindy. It may be to a movie he did, from Good Will Hunting to he was Genie on Aladdin. He was Good Morning Vietnam. There's a whole host of movies, wide range of things. Not all comedy either, sometimes drama. He had a lot of range. When Robin Williams passed away, it had a really profound effect on a lot of people. And you say, well, you didn't even know him. That's true. Not personally. But Robin Williams had a particular gift, and it wasn't just comedy, although he was something in that. And even in the stand-up world, man, people loved him. Not just the audience members, but the other comedians. This was a beloved figure. Why? He connected to people, and he connected people together. There's something to learn. This is happening on a secular level. Even outside the spiritual realm, this is happening. But he was very, very connected to people, and that's why he had this immense effect on people when he passed. Not just the tragic way that he passed, but he's gone. There'll be no more Robin Williams stand-ups or movies or so on and so forth. And even if they try to do an AI version of it, we'll go, boo, it's not the same. Well, why? Why did this guy kind of dial into that so well? Well, Robin brought a lot of joy, a lot of warmth to people, both as an entertainer and as a human being. And that's something people are looking for, to be connected. That's something people are really looking for. They want to be heard, and he would hear them. You could tell not just in the way that he would interact with fans, but you could tell in the way he would project that into his characters and what he presented on the screen. This was something a little bit more real going on here. He valued the people that he would perform for, and you could see that in the way he interacted with his audiences. It was meaningful, and there was a purpose to it. I find that very interesting, because if those things, which are so important across the board in humanity, all humans, there's something in us that this is a point by which we all connect on some level. This is connectedness. If that can happen in a non-spiritual sense, then how much more in the spiritual world should we press this and value this? When we come into the building sometimes, internally now, there is a temptation to be very stoic and be very somber to the point. This is my space. This is my seat. This is my patterns that I get into. And the joy, the warmth, the hearing of people, the valuing of the relationships in there, to finding the extra depth of meaningfulness in it and the purpose, it evaporates. It just evaporates. And that's a stunning thing to see, because if they got that in the secular world, shouldn't we have it with a greater intensity? Shouldn't we have that figured out a little bit more? After all, we don't follow the Church of Robin Williams. We follow the church, the teachings, the pattern of Jesus Christ. My goodness. He laid it out so beautifully and so perfectly. I'm grateful for the good things that have come out of the joy, the warmth, and the connectiveness that's come because of Robin Williams. You can sit down and say, hey man, do you remember that one show? People put a smile on their face. Oh, did you see those suspenders that he had? Do you remember when he was Genie? Do you remember that one time he was on Whose Line Is It Anyway? Did you see his stand-up? The guy's so frenetic. Whose mind thinks that way? And people laugh and talk, and there's a good moment to connect over that. He connects people. Even in a movie, one of his worst, I'm allowed to say that, right? We're allowed to have opinions. Patch Adams, that's a really strong opinion. He said this quote in that movie. I think it's interesting because it echoes Jesus' verse from earlier. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. That is a secular movie bumping up so close to truth and Scripture. It's like they're right there at it. But they get the sense that humans must be connected, and that even our identity is found in serving others. Well, my goodness, that is a very Jesus principle. To know who you are is to deny yourself and become more like Jesus. And what did he do? Serve others time and time and time again. In fact, if we're going to think about what it means to have joy and warmth, to hear people and be heard, to have value and to give value, to find meaningfulness and purpose. And in Jesus, it goes a step further, to have life. I mean, really, life. And have connections. We have to rethink the way that we approach Jesus and follow him. Deny ourselves, take up our cross daily, and follow him to connect with people. Isn't that what he did all the time? I mean, think of the stories that you have. Jesus made an effort to understand people. You knew it when he interacted. They all did. Think of your favorite stories in the gospel. I've got a couple of examples from Mark. You may go over and turn to Mark chapter 5 now. And there are these really unusual situations where Jesus was doing this basic thing in order to connect people together, and it's to understand. Let people know that they are heard, they are valued, they are understood. Now, we could try to get our way out of this and say, well, he knows everybody, doesn't he? He's God. That's true. But we imitate Jesus. He's given an example to us to interact in a certain way, and he did it in a very broad sense. Broad sense. How did Jesus connect? Well, he met people where they were, literally. I know we say that sometimes in a metaphorical sense, and maybe we'll get there. But in a literal sense, I want you to think of the effort that Jesus put in connecting with people and letting them know that they were heard, they were valued, and they were understood. Mark chapter 5, we begin in a wild situation here in which he is in, of all places, unexpected places, a graveyard. Then they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gadarenes. And when he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one could bind him, not even with chains, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. Neither could anyone tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountain and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and he worshiped him. And he cried out with a loud voice and said, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you, by God, that you do not torment me." For he said to him, "Come out of the man, unclean spirit." And he asked him, "What is your name?" This guy. You would think of all the people that you would choose not to connect with, or of all the people it would be most easy to come up with a reason not to connect to, it would be a guy with unclean spirits, not one, not two, but legion, running around unclothed in the tombs, breaking chains, cutting himself. If you encountered that by some chance, you walk out into the cemetery down the road on Green River Road, and you see such a character running around, my guess is your first inclination is like, I'll go talk to that guy. That guy's probably got a pretty good story. Probably not. But this guy sees Jesus and he runs to him. He communicates to Jesus. This is interesting. He met the guy in the tomb, and this guy's got a lot of problems, and he's coming to Jesus. He takes the initiative, but Jesus listens to the situation. I know that was for his disciples. I know it's for the man, but it's also for us. There was a connecting moment here. This guy had a need, and Jesus was going to be there for him to handle that need. It was dire. I mean, pretty extreme. But Jesus stopped and gave him the time to listen, to consider what was going on, and to give him his full attention. Ultimately, to give him his power and the resources to make a difference in his life. Jesus didn't look at him and say, ooh, no, and walk away. Jesus looked and he listened, and he simply cast out the unclean spirit, changing that man's life. Now, how many times do you think people had walked by and viewed that guy as having any degree of potential, of having any real value? How many times do you think people walked by and saw that guy only as a problem? How much gossip do you think took place about that guy? How much suffering do you think he went through, not just from the unclean spirits, but from the way that people regarded him, the way that people did not value him, until Jesus. Jesus chooses to make a connection with this guy, and he meets him where he literally is, in the tombs, and then he encounters him with some depth, real depth. Let's turn your life around. And I'm going to use the time I have to influence the disciples, set that example for them and Jesus, knowing thousands of years later we would be talking about this now, challenging us to start viewing connection in a completely different way. Jesus in that tomb with that guy who had every reason to be ignored welcomes him in to a story with Christ. Historically, we would never not connect that guy with Jesus. What an amazing connection to take place. What an incredible blessing to give that guy. Not just that he transformed his life in that way, but even today we talk about him, and he's always going to be connected to Jesus in that regard. It's fascinating. But Jesus doesn't stop there. Even in the next bit of that chapter, we find Jesus going into the homes of people. It's very personal. Jairus' daughter was sick, and he's the head of the synagogue, and so he's running out and sending people to Jesus, and Jesus is like, okay, I'll go to your house. And he goes to Jairus' house. The little girl has already passed away, I think this is a fascinating story on a number of levels, but for our purpose today, Jesus is connecting with people, and this is a completely different kind of person than what we saw in the graveyard. This was a guy who had position, who had authority, who had some notoriety and a good reputation in the community, but it was still a human being who needed joy, who needed warmth, who needed comfort, who needed value, to be heard, to be understood. And Jesus didn't put up barriers. I'm too busy, man. Jesus didn't come up with excuses. This makes me uncomfortable. Even when he walked into the situation where there were people that were going through the usual funeral rites and mourning and such, Jesus simply poses a question to them at that particular time. Why are you doing these things? Why make this commotion and weep, he says. The child is not dead, but sleeping. He asked a question. If you ever want to find a way to connect with someone, ask a question. Why are you making all this commotion? It checks their brains. They're going outside of the normal realm here. She's not dead. She's just sleeping. What? And then he goes in and he brings her back. No, we can't do that, bring her back. But we can be in people's homes, and we can connect, and we can listen to them, and we can take the time to where we might be going one way in the day, but we need to totally adjust our schedule because someone needs something. And we're going to connect, and we're going to listen, and we're going to value and be there for them. It's a powerful example, but he's meeting them exactly where they are, out and about. He's going with them where they need to go, to the house to handle the situation. It's very personal. He's providing an incredible example there. And then finally, we look at this one, Mark chapter 7, verses 24 through 30. Unbelievable. The Syrophoenician woman. The Syrophoenician woman. Jesus, in this point, is also going to a house, so the painting, not accurate, but he's going to a house, and this lady comes to him. She takes the initiative here. But he's not in his usual realm of places he's going, and this probably would have shocked some people. If he's in that region of Tyre and Sidon, as it says, and maybe he went to the city, don't know exactly in this particular passage, it says, from there he arose and went to the region of Tyre and Sidon, and he entered a house, and he wanted no one to know it. But he could not be hidden. His reputation went ahead. People knew the things that he had been doing and teaching and saying and healing and casting out clean spirits. But he's going to a house for rest, and he's going there for some level of anonymity. But this lady, not a Jewish lady, that's important, a Syrophoenician lady. So she would have been a Gentile. More than that, from that region, if she's from Phoenicia, they had their own gods to follow, their own temples that she might have turned to with the problem. But here she is, pagan, Gentile, northern region, and she comes to Jesus. And he meets her at the place where she has a need. And he meets her literally in that house, and she's got an incredible problem. She falls at his feet. Her young daughter had an unclean spirit, and she'd heard about him, and she came to him. She was a Greek, it says in verse 26, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. She was persistent. From the beginning of this section, it's not the scenario he had planned. But this is a human being. And I think when we start breaking down all of the encounters where Jesus is connecting with people, showing us how to connect with people, he's cutting a lot of this aside and dealing with a human being. And they all have value to him. He's going to die for all of them, but he's given his time to very specific individuals, and that should be so striking to us. Not because we can say, well, he's Jesus. Of course he would do that. But because he's Jesus, of course, we should be doing that. And much more so within our own community. It seems like he's difficult here at the beginning, but he's really testing her faith in a lot of ways. Maybe she knew a bit about him, and if he is the Christ or a teacher, and maybe she knew a little bit about the Jews and the Gentiles relationship. It's conceivable. She wasn't that far away. And maybe that's a little bit too sophisticated for her. But he gives her this thing, which has been a household analogy here, because he does have a purpose to come to the Jews first, the Jews first. Even Paul writes about that in Romans 1:16. The gospel is the power of God unto salvation, to the Jews first, and also to the Greek. So he says this to her, let the children be filled first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. That may sound really harsh to us, but she's so persistent. And she seems to be showing an element of faith here, and her turn of phrase isn't disrespectful, but she's just making a point here. You can imagine a family sitting at a table and a child is about to have their food, and he's saying, well, we don't take the food and just throw it off because it's got to go to the child. It's the purpose he came, to come to the children of Israel in a lot of ways. And she answered and said to him, yes, Lord. Yet even the little dogs under the table eat from the children's crumbs. That sounds a little strange. But if we picture that household setting where there's a family eating at a table, if that's what they did, but at the very least, a child sitting at a table trying to eat, those of you with little children know how this goes. Not all the food makes it into the mouth. Sometimes bits of it fall down into the lap and then onto the floor. And she's saying, I get that you've come to the Jews first, but even the crumb, if I could just have a crumb. I'm not taking away from the child, but eating at the same time as the child, but just a crumb. And then he connects with her. And he heals the daughter. What the pagan gods could not do, he does. He listens to her and points that she has value, and he hears her, and there's joy, and there's warmth, and there's meaningfulness and purposefulness that's found in him, and life. Life. That's what we find in Jesus. Not just for them at that time, but for us. So then we ask ourselves, well, what do we do with that? We know in the secular sense, people want to be understood and valued, and we see them yearning for that in the world today. And we're the same. We yearn for that. To know one another and be known by one another. And so that is a real challenge for us. But we shouldn't be just okay at it. We should excel. We should excel. And I know sometimes, as I said before, it is a challenge. But what does Jesus say with our challenge? Take up our cross, deny ourselves, and follow him. He's giving a pretty clear example to follow. And it may be quite difficult, and you may have to work out some strategies to kind of pursue that, but it's going to make all the difference in the world for someone's life and your own. There are people in our congregation who are just waiting to connect with someone. And you say, well, they could come and say something. But sometimes, like Jesus, we need to take the initiative. We need to take the initiative and go to them. You may notice that there's someone who seems quite alone or quite unknown, and they come in quite quickly and leave quite quickly, and that is an opportunity. Maybe they're not looking for a lot, but to make the effort, as are all of our responsibility, as best we possibly can. And you say, well, it's a big room. Kinda, it is. Kinda. So I can focus, though, on the space around me. I can do that. And I can also, here's really taking up your cross, get up and move to another side of the building for a few weeks. I know, that's a lot. I just asked a lot. But you could do that. Is that really taking up your cross? Challenge yourself. You might meet people that you didn't know you had a lot in common in. And here's the thing I learned this week. I love trying to find ways to connect people. I really do love that. I don't think I'm like a tremendous extrovert, but I do like being around people quite a bit. I'm excited for who I don't yet know in St. Vincent on this mission trip. I'm excited about that. I know a handful of people, some I haven't seen in a little while, but I know I'm going to meet brand new people. I can't wait. They're not all going to be members of the church. I'm determined that this is going to happen. But I try to think that way sometimes, and it has to be deliberate. Even sometimes I just go through, and you may be exactly the same, and you're going about your business, and you're really not looking to interact with people, and you get caught off guard. When was this? Friday. I'd gone to Franklin Street and was taking care of an errand for someone, and as I was walking back to my car, I heard a noise, Why would anyone be? I don't expect that someone's going to see me or know me. But then it kept getting stronger. David, David. What? And I look up and they're like, we were calling for you. And I was like, I don't expect it, that would seem strange to me. And it was Zach and Courtney Copley, and they were eating ice cream, and it was Zach's birthday, and it was a good conversation to have with them. But she ended up being on the phone with her mom, so then I felt intrusive, but then you're like, okay, happy birthday. But that's our church members. And if you're sitting there going, I don't even know who Zach and Courtney are, well, now you have an opportunity. Tina's put a lot of work in and fixing those boards out there in the hallway, and sometimes I see people looking there and I wonder, I hope they're not ashamed to be doing that, because I do that too. And what an amazing tool when you hear a name to be able to go to put a face to it and go, yes, now I can do that. We should celebrate that that's a way to help make a connection. That is a very valuable tool to have. And if you don't know exactly what to say to someone, here's the most basic thing. Yes, hi, how are you doing? Okay, we're through that that point. Even the most generic thing, what do you do? I know, kind of lame as an initial conversation piece, so we have to curve it there for a little bit. What do you do? Well, perhaps Steve Miller would say, I'm a farmer. Hope you don't mind, Steve. And you say, oh, the natural thing to be, if we don't want to get too personal on this, if we don't want to go like, where's your farm? Okay, that's fine. But why'd you become a farmer? And if he's so inclined, he may tell you for a number of reasons. Well, my ancestors were farmers. That gives you a bit of information to where you can connect with someone. And what if he says, I love growing things. I learned that I have a skill for growing things, and I just take great joy in that. And now you found a different level to connect on. And it could be any number of things. You can stop and think about the people that enter our congregation, and you could do the same question. What do you do? I'm a school teacher. Why'd you become a school teacher? Oh, I love working with kids, and I love seeing the growth. My 5 generations we've been school teachers, and I just love it so much. Wow, that's so amazing. And the point of the conversation isn't to be confrontational or to suddenly talk about, oh, these schools today, I can't believe you would do that. Okay, stop. That's not going to connect. Barriers. We don't do the barriers. It's not to push a point or make sure that you get your opinion out there. It's to simply connect and to understand. What if the whole point of the conversation was to understand the other person, and they reciprocate that, and their whole point is to understand you. And now the conversation is to connect with people and to know with some level of depth. It's a start. And it can be over all manner of topics. I look for these things all the time. Just give me a connecting point, any connecting point that I can have. It doesn't always work. Some people's not always open to it, but you know what? The vast majority of people are. And I know sometimes we think a barrier to this is, but what if they won't talk to me? What if they reject me in some way? That'll bother me. I promise you, through personal experience, you'll get over that when it happens enough times. And then you'll learn, you know what? Maybe I can allow the 99 people out of 100 who said good things and tried to connect back. What if I let that be what leads me forward? They didn't all listen to Jesus. They didn't all want to connect with him. But he pressed on anyway. And all those lives that he changed was enormous, massive, and transformative. We are the product of that. Generations and generations and generations of Christians from Jesus connecting, building the church, leading to us. We have to be full of gratitude to that. And also accept our responsibility that continues forward. Well, that'll best happen when we deal with that internally and making sure we connect with one another and bring joy to one another, warmth, value, understanding, and life. It is a blessing to be a Christian. Think about and challenge yourself on how you can further connect with the people in your congregation. Go outside your normal space. Please do that. we can only be blessed by your participation in that. And the new people who are not yet members of our congregation, they will be blessed by that as well. It's a thing we all do together, beginning with Jesus' example. Tonight, we want to encourage you to think about your Christianity and your faith and to grow. Connecting with Jesus is the most important thing you could possibly ever do. Don't let anything hold you back ever. And one of the things, don't hesitate to put your faith forward, to put your life and dedicate that to Christ. We talk about obeying the gospel, and as I said this morning, you need to know the Scripture, but what that means is you need to know Jesus. You need to know who He is, why He came, what He did for you, and what He wants for you. To be with Him in heaven, to be free from your sins, to not carry that burden, to be able to sleep in peace, to know that you can not just have the possibility of heaven, but the assurances of the promises of God. Oh, it's a different life. It's the best life. And that's what Jesus gives. And so if you will come to know Him through the Scriptures, and if you will turn away from the ways of the world and turn to Him, and if you will commit to Him, and if you will profess Him as the Christ, the Son of God, and if you will be baptized into Him, come out, He will transform you, wash your sin away, and you will be a child of God. Greatest decision you could possibly ever make. Transformative. Connect to Jesus. If there are ways that we can help you in that, please let us know as we stand and as we sing.